quite a day. It's been a week, right? It's been a week. So, we've been talking about getting your spiritual house in order. We've been talking about regulating your emotions. We've been talking about regulating your nervous system. And then all through the social medias today, everyone is talking about, I think there part of the confusion is people are interchangeably using ex, act and order, and acts and order are two different things. Okay, so if we recall, we'll go through the various branches of government and how all of this works, but we need to understand that there is a difference between an act or a bill. Bills are an act of Congress and an executive order. Okay. We've got to know the difference between them. And this is why it is important that we regulate our emotions and our nervous systems, because they are putting out a lot of stuff to really break you down and get you to react emotionally. Okay. As I've said to multiple people today, please consider this not really even a maneuver, but we'll call it a maneuver, right? Maneuvers are part of battles, and battles are part of wars. You can lose the battle and not win the war. Okay. And I'm going to explain what has happened. I'm going to rely on ChatGPT because I did pass government or civics in high school, but it is not my area of specialty. And the reason I'm doing it this way is because it's not my area of specialty, but also to signal to you what you need to be doing instead of reacting and getting all emotional about all of this. Okay. So before we get into that, if you are new here, my name is Tamira. I am a digital marketing strategist by day with over 32 years of sales, marketing, and leadership experience. And I very clearly am a Black woman. Okay. And we are, we on my channel, on my pages, profiles, whatever you want to call them, it's always about marketing mindset and monetization. And all of this falls under monetization. And I'm always going to give you like action steps, actionables, what you can be doing, right? Because we don't play victim over here. We are not into victimization. That's not what we do. Okay. So, with that being said, as you may have heard, and like I said, people are using the words order and act interchangeably, right? They're using those words interchangeably. Okay. And it's important to know the difference between the two. So I'm going to briefly go over what was done today. And then before we dig deep into it, we're going to explain the difference between an act of Congress or a bill and the executive orders. Okay. So I'm reading directly from ChatGPT. Today, President Donald Trump, I hate saying his name, took significant actions in line with his administration's priority. And they talk about immigration policy, artificial intelligence initiative, pardons, and legal address. So then I asked it, what order did he revoke? Okay. And so it came back with on January 20th, 2025, the president issued several executive orders revoking previous presidential directives, notably DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. The president signed orders terminating DEI programs, asserting that these initiatives discriminate against other Americans. It's gaslighting, okay? This action included revoking orders dating back to 1965, such as those protecting workers from discrimination, specifically targeting DEI hires among federal contractors. I'm not even going to get into all what DEI is, but DEI is so much more than hiring. DEI encompasses your existing employees and making sure that you make decisions and you treat people fairly and that you are including people and making people feel included in the workplace. DEI is so much more than hiring. And this term DEI hire replaces affirmative action hire. And it there's so much double talk and bullshit and gaslighting involved with this. It's not even funny. Okay. Then there's artificial intelligence safety. He rescinded the 2023 executive order signed by former President Joe Biden that aimed to mitigate risks posed by artificial intelligence to consumers, workers, and national security, because these are masters of misinformation and disinformation. I'm just going to say it. Climate change policies. President Trump revoked several executive orders related to the previous administration's efforts to combat climate change. We're not like, this is not the stuff we're talking about. Okay. So those were the actions. So I said, what executive order related to EEOC? The Equal Employment Opportunity, whatever the C stands for. So on January, and in ChatGPT then again said on January 21st, 2025, the president, because I don't say that person's name, issued an executive order that significantly impacts the EEOC, the Equal Opportunity Commission, that's what the C stands for, and its enforcement of anti-discrimination policies. This order mandates that the elimination of DEI, or diversity, equity, inclusion programs within federal agencies and among federal contractors. It specifically revokes several long-standing executive orders, including Executive Order 11246 from 1965, originally signed by President Lyndon Baines Johnson. This order prohibited federal contractors from discriminating in employment decisions based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. It also required affirmative action to ensure equal employment opportunities. Executive Order 11375 from 1967 amended EO Executive Order 11246 to include sex as a protected category, further strengthening anti-discrimination policies. Executive Order 11478 from 1969, signed by Republican President Richard Nixon. This order expanded equal employment opportunity protections to the federal civilian workforce. Okay. And Executive Order 12672 from 2014, signed by Forever POTUS President Barack Obama. This order amended previous orders to include protections against discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity for federal contractors and the federal workforce. By revoking these orders, the now president's directive aims to dismantle DEI initiatives, asserting that such programs constitute illegal and immoral discrimination. This action represents a significant shift in federal employment policies. So this is not an act that was revoked. It was an executive order that was revoked, okay? Moving away from the affirmative action and equal opportunity frameworks that have been in place for decades. The EEOC, responsible for enforcing federal laws against employment discrimination, will be directly affected by these changes. The Commission's future role in promoting workplace diversity and addressing discrimination claims may be substantially altered under this new directive. I mean, how can you enforce it when your office doesn't even reflect it? Okay. Additionally, the current president has appointed Andrea Lucas as the new chair of the EEOC. Lucas, who has served on the commission since 2020, is expected to implement significant changes in employment law and policy, aligning with the administration's stance on DEI programs. Okay. So then I asked, this does not impact private employers, like private employers. And it responded with, the current president's executive order targeting diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI initiatives and related protections primarily affects federal agencies and contractors. However, its implications for private employees are more indirect. Here's how it breaks down. Federal contractors under direct impact. Employers who contract with the federal government must comply with federal executive orders as part of their agreements. The executive order revoking DEI programs removes the requirements for these contractors to implement affirmative action plans or provide DEI related, because you got to understand, DEI and affirmative action may overlap, but they are not the same thing. I am not going over that in this video. This is actually not even the type of content I typically do. Okay, but these are not normal times. So here we are. Okay. But DEI and affirmative action overlap, but they are not one and the same as they are being presented. That much I do know and will tell you. And you have a phone and you can Google, you can chat GPT, you can Claude, you can Perplexity, just like I do. So I'm going to start again. For federal contractors, employers who contract with the federal government must comply with federal executive orders as part of their agreements. The executive order revoking DEI programs removes the requirement for these contractors to implement affirmative action plans or provide DEI related training. Federal contractors may no longer be required to demonstrate proactive measures to diversify their workforce. And as far as federal employees, federal agencies themselves are now restricted from implementing DEI programs or training that emphasizes systemic discrimination or unconscious bias. So basically, I'm not even going to go there. I'm not. Okay, so let's talk about the indirect impact. I mean, we're rolling, so we might as well. Okay, for private employers, this executive order does not directly affect private sector employers that are not federal contractors. These companies remain governed by federal laws. Okay, have your ears perked up. Double tap the screen twice if you are listening. Double tap the screen twice if you are okay. Okay? I'm going to say it again. The executive order does not directly affect private sector employers that are not federal contractors. These companies remain governed by federal laws like Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. The Americans with Disabilities Act protects individuals with disabilities. Age discrimination in the Employment Act, ADEA, prohibits age discrimination. However, there could be ripple effects, legal challenges. If federal contractors are no longer bound by DEI requirements, this is why this is a maneuver, not the battle, not the war. The battle begins when it's challenged legally. If federal contractors are no longer bound by DEI requirements, private employers may face less external pressure to adopt similar measures unless required by state law or internal policies. Cultural shift. A federal rollback of DEI programs might embolden critics of such initiatives, potentially influencing public discourse or discouraging some private employers from prioritizing similar efforts. Now we're on to still under indirect impact, state and local laws. Many states and cities have their own local laws and requirements around affirmative action, DEI programs, and anti-discrimination policies. Employers in states like California or New York, for example, still face robust DEI requirements regardless of federal changes. The bottom line, per ChatGPT, the executive order does not revoke anti-discrimination laws or protections for employees in the private sector. Employees who are not federal contractors are not directly affected, but the broader policy and cultural environment could shift in ways that influence business practices. Okay. And let's see, was there something else that I asked? Okay. So before we get into the difference between acts of Congress / bills and orders, I'm going to do a pulse check and see if we are all still here. Double tap the screen, drop a 2 in the comments, blink twice if you are okay. It's so important that we not just read headlines and react and get our emotions in a tizzy based off of headlines. That is a tactic to disarm you. Okay? We need to be reading, and a lot. We need to be reading daily, 30 minutes, 10 pages minimum. We need to be reading. Okay? We've got to sharpen the saw. We got to stay on top of it. Okay. So let's move into, I asked ChatGPT to compare and contrast acts of Congress or bills because I think I wasn't sure and it didn't really, it just kept rolling with what I said versus executive order. So it said, here's a comparison and contrast between acts of Congress slash bills and executive order. Acts of Congress slash bills. The definition: a bill is a proposed law introduced in either the House of Representatives or the Senate. Once passed by both chambers and signed by the president, it becomes an act of Congress and has the force of the law. Okay, the creation process. Remember, I'm Just a Bill on Capitol Hill. You can go back in YouTube and find that. Okay, so it's introduced. A member of Congress introduces the bill. Committee review. The bill is reviewed, amended, and voted in committees. Debated and voted. It is debated and voted in both the House and the Senate. Reconciliation. If different versions pass in the two chambers, a conference committee reconciles them. And then step 5 is it goes for presidential approval. The president can sign it into law or veto it. Congress can override the veto with a 2/3 majority. Scope and power. Acts of Congress have a broad scope, applying nationally and often establishing long-term policies. They can allocate funds, create or modify government programs, and impose regulations. And there are checks and balances subject to judicial review to ensure constitutionality. And Congress has the power to repeal or amend existing acts. Duration: permanent unless repealed or amended by another act or deemed by unconstitutional by the judiciary. So that's the lower federal courts up to and including the Supreme Court. And remember, not everything that goes through the lower courts makes its way to the Supreme Court. Okay. Notice that it does not say that the president can revoke a law. The president cannot revoke a law or usurp Congress. Okay. And you can look that up because I already looked it up and that's how I got that wording. I don't know. My ChatGPT is out of control. So I'd have to go back and figure out which chat I asked that in yesterday. Let's see if I can find it. How executive orders work. I did. Okay, I think I found it. Now let me find in here. So here's what an executive order can do. The president can issue an executive order to strengthen the enforcement of existing voting rights protections or address voting rights. This is specifically related to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, because that's what I was getting off of social media. But somewhere in here it says, let's see. Executive orders are directives issued by the President of the United States, POTUS, to manage operations of the federal government. They have both the force of law. They have the force of law, but do not require approval from Congress. Here's how they work. The purpose is threefold. 1, administrative function, used to direct federal agencies in how they should operate or enforce laws. 2, policy implementation, help the president pursue policy objectives without waiting for Congress to pass legislation. And 3, emergency powers, can address urgent matters or crises. Legal basis. Number 1 is constitutional authority. The president's power to issue executive orders stems from the Constitution, particularly Article 2, which vests executive power in the president. And then there is also statutory authority. The Congress may delegate specific powers to the president through legislation, allowing executive orders to enforce or clarify those laws. And then there's the process: drafting, review, signing, and publication. Let's talk about the limits, okay? Number 1, the first limited list is judicial review. Courts can strike down executive orders that exceeds the president's authority or violate the Constitution, i.e. student loan forgiveness, okay? 2, congressional, and that's me ad-libbing there. 2, congressional action. Congress can pass laws to override or limit an executive order through the president, who can veto such laws. 3, scope. Executive orders can only direct federal agencies and employees. They cannot create new laws. They cannot create new laws. They cannot create new laws, appropriate funds, or apply directly to private citizens. Okay, and then it gives some examples. And then I asked it about, can the Civil Rights Act of 1965 be revoked by way of executive order, and if so, how so? And again, that's based on what was showing up on my TikTok. People were saying that I mean, somebody was like, there were 2 or 3 people like crashing out in tears because he revoked the Civil Rights Act of 1965. And that just didn't sound right to me. Okay. So when it doesn't sound right, you need to go to Chat GPT. You need to go to Perplexity and get sources, right? And even ask it for the articles within the Constitution. Ask it for the statute number, the bill number, and all of that special gobbledygook stuff, right? So the Civil Rights Act of 1965, often referred to as the Voting Rights Act of 1965, cannot be fully revoked or reinstated by executive order because it is a federal law enacted by Congress. So when you see people talking about this and they're talking about he revoked an act, that I believe they mean order, because they're not doing the homework. They're not fact checking themselves. They are rushing to be one of the first and get the engagement and get the clicks and get the views. And they're calling it an act when it is actually an order that he revoked. Okay. However, the president, is enacted by Congress. However, the president can use executive orders to take specific actions to enforce or expand the protections under the act, particularly in areas where the executive branch has authority. Okay. So here are the limitations of executive orders. Y'all need to know this stuff. When y'all get long posts that put this stuff up, it is no longer acceptable to say, who's going to read all that? If you want to remain free, if you want your children to remain free, if you want your grandchildren to remain free, you need to read all of that, because your ancestors did not have the legal right to know how to read. They weren't even considered a full person at one point. They were not even considered citizens. They've been trying to figure out what to do with us forever. And that's why I say, let it burn to the ground. Okay? Because it was never built for us anyway. We can't get what we want as long as we keep trying to fit into what was not created for us. It needs to burn to the ground and be built with us included. Enough of that talk. Okay. So limitations of executive orders: cannot create or amend laws. An executive order cannot override or replace parts of the Voting Rights Act struck down by the Supreme Court. For example, the 2013 Shelby County versus Holder decision, which invalidated the preclearance formula in Section 4B, whatever the heck that means. Cannot usurp congressional authority. Only Congress can legislate to restore the provisions of the Voting Rights Act or modify its scope. He does not have the scope to change the act. He cannot change the law. He can only oversee the federal government. Okay, so can we now calm down? Can we please calm down? Can we regulate our emotions? Can we regulate our nervous systems so we can talk about what we need to be talking about, is maneuvering and making this money? Because that's what we need to be talking about. We need to be talking about building businesses. We need to be talking about wealth creation and creating legacy. But we keep reacting to all this insanity, much of which is going to die down, right? So just like when Biden did the executive order to do whatever he had planned to do with student loan debt, and they filed lawsuits, there will be lawsuits coming. They've already started filing lawsuits about, arresting kids at school for immigration. There will be lawsuits. There will be resistance. But you are not going to make it through these 4 years if you do not regulate your emotions and strengthen your nervous system. You're not going to make it through these 4 years without being put on all kinds of medications and possibly even trips to the hospital, or going to jail for clocking somebody in the head. You've got to regulate your emotions and your nervous system. We've talked about this. I've given you tools. I've given you resources. But we have to stop reacting. We are overreacting and reacting. This is a maneuver. They know it is a maneuver. They expect resistance. Okay. A lot of this, we have to remember we're dealing with a narcissist. And I don't even mean just one individual. This country, patriarchy, supremacy, all of that is rooted in dark forces and narcissism. And y'all been talking about narcissists for I don't know how many years now. My grandson's going to be 11, so probably at least 11 years. So we have to treat this no differently. And the best defense is an offense, which is regulating your emotions and your nervous system, pulling away your attention, getting on your grind and building your own business. If you are a federal employee or a federal contractor, I'm not talking about a side hustle. I'm talking about you full-fledged creating that LLC, going out, getting the clients, consulting, and doing whatever it is your wheelhouse and what you know better than anybody else. If you are a private sector employee, see, y'all got to know the difference between the two, okay? If you are a private sector employee, you need to be doing the same. You need to be building a network. You need to be building community. You need to be building portfolio. You need to be getting social proof. You need to be showing up and showing out online. But reacting and getting in an emotional tizzy over every little thing this person does is not going to serve you well. It is not going to serve your children well. It is not going to serve your grandchildren well. It is not going to serve your community well. We have to stop. I don't care who it is. If it is the shade room, if it is any of those other aggregate sources online, you still need to be looking up and coming to your own conclusion and getting as non-biased of information to help you come to that conclusion as possible. For me, that is ChatGPT, because ChatGPT knows that is what I want. Don't come at me with no bias. Don't come at me with no pre-programmed bias. And I talk back to ChatGPT and make it come to me without that crap. And when it tries to tell me it can't do it, I will tell it, yes, you can. You've done it before. Right? This is still America. There is still a constitution. There is still processes. I gotta sneeze. Bless me. There are still processes. There are still laws, and lots of them. We live in a litigious society. The United States sues people, and people sue the United States. That is how we have gotten to where we are. That has not changed. He is not the dictator that he wants to be. He can't just come in and on day one, he is the king in that. There are various theories for what he is trying to set us up for. Okay, there are various theories. I'm not getting into all that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about orders versus acts. Where is it? Donde está? Okay, so that was how do executive orders work. So, okay, so let's go back to acts of Congress versus executive order. This is actually kind of boring. I'm gonna keep it real, but y'all gotta learn it. You gotta be on top of it. This is how we've won before. Okay, acts of Congress / bills. A bill is proposed law. We already talked about this, right? What a bill is, right? And the 5 steps: introduction, committee review, debate and voting, reconciliation, presidential approval, scope and power. Acts of Congress have a broad scope, applying nationally and often establishing long-term policies. They can allocate funds, create or modify government programs, and impose regulations, checks and balances subject to judicial review to ensure constitutionality. Congress has the power to repeal and amend existing acts, permanent unless repealed or amended by another act or deemed unconstitutional by the judiciary. Okay, so executive orders, a directive issued by the president to manage operations of the federal government. I feel like this is deja vu that we already went over all this. It does not require approval from Congress, but must derive from authority from existing law or the Constitution, creation process drafted by the executive branch or its agency, signed by the president, and published in the Federal Register. Scope and power. Executive orders are narrower. Y'all know me and those ER words. Baby, when I used to have to do those close those loans, those home equity loans, and say the borrower, it was embarrassing. Okay. So executive orders are more narrow in scope, typically addressing the functioning of the executive branch or implementing laws already passed by Congress. Cannot create new laws or allocate funds without congressional approval, and checks and balances. Laws are created by Congress. Laws are created by Congress. Laws are acts of Congress. Laws are acts of Congress. When you hear act, you should think act of Congress, law, statutes, that acts of Congress, law, Congress, the Senate. Okay? The president is involved in that he can sign it or he can veto it. And then if they get a 2/3 vote, they can override him. The whole system is built on checks and balances. Okay? Congress can pass legislation to override an executive order, though the president can veto this. Future presidents can revoke, which is what happened here, or amend previous executive orders. He revoked a previous order from 1965 under LBJ, and it pertains to running of the government. Now, does that influence private employers? It definitely could. There are going to be some who get a little crazy, but it's important for you to actually be listening to this and looking this stuff up in case they get to talking crazy and acting crazy on your job. And at this point, I wouldn't be running to the EEOC. I would be running to an attorney that specializes in this stuff, not somebody that your mama know. And document. Okay? So subject to judicial review to ensure constitutionality, Congress can pass legislation to override, though the president can veto, and future presidents can revoke or amend previous orders. Duration effective immediately upon signing, but can be rescinded by future administrations or invalidated in the courts. So it gave me a little charty chart. I love tables and charts, by the way. So in contrast, when it comes to authority, acts of Congress derive power from the legislative branch's authority to create laws. Laws, acts, Congress. Laws, acts, Congress. Orders, president. Orders, president, not the law. Orders, president, not the law. Orders, president, federal government. Orders, president, federal government and agencies. Okay. Executive orders derive power from the president's authority under the Constitution or existing law. The creation process. Acts involve deliberation and approval by multiple branches, both the Congress and the Senate, and then the president can sign it or veto it. And if he vetoes it, they can still push it through with a 2/3 vote. That's why it's always important to vote in the midterms. It is always important to vote in the midterms. It is highly important that we show up and show out in 2 years. Okay? It ain't about red versus blue and Democrat and all that. Y'all know. You know what to do. Okay? The creation process acts involves deliberation and approval by multiple branches. Executive orders bypass Congress and reflect executive discretion, but it's relating to the federal government mostly and agencies. They cannot override, revoke laws. Only Congress can do that. Otherwise, a lot of things would already be solved and or made worse, because for every action, there's an equal but opposite reaction, and that is what we are seeing here. In terms of flexibility, acts are hard, or bills. When you think acts, also think bills, right? Acts, bills, and laws. I think at the federal level, they're bills, and at the state level, they might be statutory. They might be statutes. Don't quote me on that. Look it up. Okay. Acts are harder to change or repeal. That's why we often say it could take an act of Congress or an act of God, because they're almost one and the same. Okay. Executive orders can easily be rescinded or replaced by subsequent presidents. So, key insight: while acts of Congress are the primary mechanism for creating laws and enacting national policies, executive orders allow presidents to act swiftly within their authority, often in response to urgent or administrative matters. However, the reliance on executive orders can sometimes blur the separation of powers, sparking debates about presidential overreach, which was with their argument with Biden and student loan forgiveness. And they stacked the courts. And Biden has appointed more judges, I think, than anyone in his term. Don't quote me on that. There's a lot being thrown at us. That's why when you get something in front of you that makes you go, or makes you want to scream, before you scream, get to looking stuff up and asking questions to figure it out. Because when you're reacting, you're spreading misinformation and disinformation, even though it is not your intention to do so, which is putting all of our nervous systems in a vulnerable place, which we cannot afford at this point in time. Okay. So I'm going to check and see if there's any comments, any questions. Like I said, this is not my normal subject matter. My normal subject matter is for us to be talking about building legacy, building businesses. Because that's what you need to be on right now if you are a federal employee or a contractor. That's what you, especially if you're still getting paid. Now, with that being said, know the rules for where you work and if that is something you can do or not do. But figure it out. Okay. There are other people in your family that could probably do it if it's not you. Just make sure you ain't headed for divorce. Okay. You have to know the difference. Acts and orders is being used interchangeably, and people are inadvertently, without malintent, y'all think that actual law that protects us. And I get it. I would melt down too. And I was about to, but it just didn't sound right. And I was like, he can't do that. He cannot do that. Y'all got to stop being so busy with stuff that don't matter, so that when stuff like this happens, it don't take long. When it first came up yesterday, I looked it up real quick and I was good within a matter of seconds. It don't take long. It don't take long. Thank you for the follow. It does not take long at all. But you are responsible for what you know, what you believe, what you see, and what you hear. It is up to you to run all of that through a filter. And it's not just the mainstream media. You have to remember, a lot of these podcasters, a lot of these coaches and gurus, if they are not being paid by somebody or have been paid by somebody, they often have their own agendas. Thank you for the love. You have to remember that. I'm reading straight from ChatGPT. Keep in mind, what you put in there, you might not get the exact result that I get, but it should be pretty dang close, right? You've got to just real quickly look stuff up. That's why a lot of people don't even like talking to me. And I don't care, because I'm going to look that stuff up, right? And it's to the point, because y'all love to try to tussle in the comments and stuff. I tend to look things up and make sure I am accurate before I come live and talk about stuff. That's just my personality, though. It's not about being right. I just don't like for people to try to talk to me like I'm stupid. I mean, I've come a long way with that trigger. And I do my shadow work journal. However, I am human. Thank you. What does that say? Azure World, Blue World. Under the Desk News is a great source. I would have probably been melting down like all of you, but earlier this week, she didn't go into a full what is the difference like I just did, but she very briefly in one of her videos said that executive orders are more like a wish list. They are not law. And I was like, oh, okay. Because we got excited when there are certain executive orders that, like Biden did, for example, right? Like student loan forgiveness. A lot of people got excited and got happy. But the point is, just like Biden was challenged and not able to do certain things, and I know we actually want to keep as much going up from up SCOTUS as we can, because he's got them in his back pocket. He's got dirt on them, right? Like in Godfather 2, that senator from Nevada, how they invited him and he could barely pronounce their son's name, because back then being Italian wasn't really being white. It was like that in Irish, he was kind of lower on the lower end, to be honest, right? I ain't hating. I'm just telling you, it's out there. Everybody know it. Everybody know it, right? So that was just like they mess up our names and act like they can't pronounce our names. There was a time when they did that to Polish people, when they did that to Italians. If your name wasn't Smith, right? So that's what the little senator from Nevada did to Michael Corleone's son. I forgot his name. I think his name was Vito. Vito Corleone. And it's like 5 letters, maybe 6 letters. Corleone, like maybe 8, something like that. I don't know. And yeah, so microaggression, right? And so, they wrote a sizable donation to him, and they invited him to something or other. And, he hooked up with a SW. Y'all know what a SW is? An example of a SW, they work on OF sometimes, or the corner, or websites, and they have a manager. I don't know what you heard about me. And so they hooked him up with this SW, and dude woke up. She was killed, and it was a mess. Unalived. And it was a mess. I'm just talking about a movie, though. She was unalived, and now they own him. Now they've got him in their back pocket. Now, I imagine, I have no proof whatsoever. This is for entertainment purposes only. I imagine that their orange god daddy king, it has a lot of that on some people. In fact, I believe that's what happened to, remember that black guy out of Florida that got caught with drugs in a male SW in a hotel? I would suspect, in my movie adaptation of the events, that's what happened. Let's put it that way. Where I have complete poetic license, that's what happened. It's plausible, but it's just for entertainment purposes only. Just saying. So y'all need to get to know your government and how it works, and how laws are made, and what the president and his powers actually are, and what he can do. This was a maneuver. It was not the battle, and it certainly was not the war. Okay, that is not to minimize what has actually happened to thousands of federal employees who will be impacted by this. That is not to minimize it at all in any way, shape, or form. Please don't take that from what I am saying here. It's bad. It's a maneuver, but they are far from winning the war. The biggest war you need to be concerned with right now is the psychological war and the spiritual war, which are kind of inextricably intertwined, meaning it's very difficult to separate the two. A spiritual war usually comes with psychological warfare. A psychological war, at least by the person engaging in dark psychology, is usually something with a dark spirit. So in that way, it is psychological warfare. I mean, spiritual warfare. So you've got to get your spiritual house in order. You got to clean it up. You've got to make it a daily practice. You cannot just be walking around here nilly-willy. For some of us, it is time to grow up. And I know some of y'all frontal lobe has not done whatever they say, fully formed, closed, or whatever. I don't know. That's not my specialty. But you've got to do the homework, and you've got to read. Years ago, it was illegal for us to be able to read. And it is something we take so for granted that we will sit there and say, who you think gonna read all that? It impacts your life. Your life is getting to the point that it is going to be dependent upon this stuff and if you read it or not. They are banking on you not reading it. There is the saying, if you want to hide something from folk, put it in a book. And sadly, y'all are proving it true. It is time to get your spiritual house in order. In order. Get your emotional system regulated, your nervous system regulated. They're going to keep coming at you with this BS. And you cannot assume, because it looks, y'all know what them Shade Room and other sites like it, what their posts look like, though they're the images that they put out. Just because it came from there does not mean it is 100%. You need to see it for yourself. You've got to run everything through a filter. You've got to question everything. You've got to engage in critical thinking and not being, how do I want to say this? Not being critical for the sake of just being critical. You know, like how there are some people that you just always criticize them and you're hypercritical of them. This is about survival. This is about thriving. You've got to. If you don't, we're in trouble. As I said earlier, if your bloodline is still here, part of why your bloodline is still here is because of discernment. Part of why your bloodline is still here is because of critical thinking. I need y'all to stop treating your ancestors and handling your ancestors as just because they spoke differently, just because they weren't formally educated as you are, and some of them were, just because it was illegal for them to read, just because they were sharecroppers or worked in the fields, does not mean that those people were unintelligent. And they may have acted unintelligent, but it does not mean they were. Let me see if I can delete. Yeah, okay. Thank you for the love. You have to stop mishandling them that way. In many respects, some of y'all are less educated than them because it is no excuse for you. And you choose to not read what you need to be reading, to not understanding what you need to understand. They're rolling over in their grave what all they went through, and you won't even read 2 paragraphs that have been dumbed down to a 5th grade level. We got to do better. Point blank, period, end of discussion. I'm getting tired. And tomorrow, I got to come back tomorrow, and I got to be back to business. Tomorrow, I got to be back to business. Tomorrow, we got to be talking about turning all of this into money, how to monetize, right? How to get in the Luminary Path, my 6-month intensive. How to monetize what you already know. How to document what you're going through and monetize it. How to solve your own problem and how to monetize it. That's what we need to be talking about. But see, I'm going to be honest with you. If you won't read and learn what you need to know here, You can pay me to teach you how to monetize what you know, how to get paid to exist and all that, but you'll never get paid to exist or do it because you don't want to do the work because it's too much work. And that's why they run around calling y'all DEI hires. Because even at our most mediocre, we're still often running laps because we've been taught that we have to work at least 3 times as hard. So, anyway, an act and an order are not the same thing. Act is a law, acts are bills, acts is Congress. Orders are the president. Orders usually are relating to the federal government and agencies. What was revoked was an order. It was not a law that was revoked or rescinded. The executive orders do not have the power to do that. To make it all quick and easy and short, right? There are lots of different types of lawyers and attorneys. Okay. Some of them might not even know this, to be honest with you. You've got to look it up. You got to question it. We talked about that earlier when we went through Kevin Trudeau. Let me see if I still got it up. We talked about Kevin Trudeau. Is that Kevin Trudeau? It is. What did Kevin say? It is okay to seek counsel and opinions, but never let someone tell you what you have to do. Get advice, but do not take orders. 95% of what we think are facts are nothing more than opinions, right? We talked about it when we went through my 10 tips for fine-tuning and developing your not intuition but discernment. When we talked about seeking mentorship, we said find mentors or advisors who demonstrate strong discernment, learn from their experience and insights to enhance your own judgment, right? But you have to learn to trust yourself. When we talked about critical thinking, we said analyze information critically, questioning the sources and motives behind it. Questioning the sources and motives behind it. Look for evidence, consistency, and logical reasoning in the information presented to you. Do not paint yourself into a corner by way of an echo chamber. You do have to get varying opinions and information. Sometimes I had to sit in a room today with someone I do not like. It was a virtual room, but still. You still got to be around people that you don't like. It's dangerous to you if you don't, because they are also teaching you and helping you navigate all of this, whether they like it or not. And y'all know how I am when I don't like somebody. I don't want nothing to do with you. Nothing at all. Nathan. All right. It's late. I'm going to go. I will see y'all on the next go round. Probably this week I've been doing good with like around 9 o'clock in the morning, having coffee and chit-chatting, just chatting it up, going through some personal development. So we'll do that in the morning, probably. What is tomorrow? Friday? I think tomorrow is Friday. Or is tomorrow Thursday? Is today Wednesday or Thursday? I don't even know. I think today is Wednesday. So tomorrow is Thursday. So yeah, we'll likely do that tomorrow morning. All right, y'all. See you on the next live. Bye.